Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I am pleased to be joined by Richard Fox, author of Men of Bretton, which just released. Richard, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, my first question for you is how did you first get into writing on your own, and then eventually how did you get into publishing?
My very first foray into writing was in high school when I was in junior ROTC and there was a annual anti-drug sort of, week that was going on. And they said, we need a play. And who wants to do it? And I was like, "Oh, I'll do it. So I wrote a little play that, people that went to it and they laughed when they were supposed to laugh. They got a little sad when they're supposed to get sad. So I was like, yeah, okay. And then when I was in college, I'd written some scenes for a what's called the 100th Night Show, where I went to the United States Military Academy, and for the seniors, the firsties, when they're 100 nights away from graduation, they put on a show that sort of lampoons their whole 4 years at West Point. And so I wrote a couple scenes, and one of them had the crocodile hunter watching cadets out in the woods, and people laugh when they're supposed to laugh, and that worked out pretty well. And as time went on, I joined the army and then a war started right away, so I didn't have a lot of time to put towards writing or thoughts about it. And I was home off of from mid-tour leave, and I was watching a show about the Red Baron with my brother on the History Channel. And he looked at me and says, there's never been a movie about the Red Baron." And I said, "No, there hasn't. We should write one." And turns out there had been one, but different discussion. And so I got books on how to write a screenplay. I got books about the Red Baron's life. I read them and I got this, figured out how to write a screenplay, and I put that into some contests and it did pretty well. A lot of people liked it. So I'm like, maybe there's something here. And then I went to redeployed again. And when I came back, I had a job where I wasn't getting a whole lot of, a lot of work to do during the day. And I came across a blog from Joseph Conrath, who was an indie this is back in 2009, and he had just began one of the major guys in self-publishing, and his blog put out, here's how he became an independent publisher and here's how to do it. I'm like, that's I could do that. That's possible. And so I turned my Red Baron script into a novel, and I wrote some spy thrillers based very loosely on my experiences in Iraq and other military intelligence sort of things, which did not sell well. And luckily for me, I had the temerity to ask a well-known and very successful spy thriller author named Russell Blake what I was doing wrong. And he said, "Have you considered writing a different genre?" Um, that might have been a little shade from him saying that what I was writing wasn't good, but instead I took it as, what could I write? And I thought, well, I've loved Star Wars since before I could walk. And actually, let me show you something because I can see your library there.
Mhm.
This might be neat. So I was in college, and my mother went to an Outback Steakhouse near Skywalker Ranch. And she's just finishing up, and but who else but the George Lucas walks into the Outback Steakhouse. And my mother goes over there, and it's hard to see with that, and gets his autograph for me.
Well, that's so
But
cool.
it's so hard to see, but I've got it laminated.
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah.
And so to Richard, George Lucas. And so I've had that ever since. So, but that was and there's just a chance encounter. And when I got the call that this has happened and this had been signed for me, I was stoked. But and, so then as for the rest of the writing, so then Russell Blake suggested a different genre. Like, well, I love Star Wars since before I could walk. Let me write some space operas and military sci-fi action. And that was The Ember War, which sold very well and led to full-time writing for me. And then I think that's book. I think I'm in the 70s now for published books.
Wow.
So, and it's just been it's been a really great journey the whole time.
So, before we get into this specific book, I did want to ask, because I always find this fascinating, is how did you get connected with Bane specifically?
So for Bane, I was lucky enough to be invited into an author get together called Archer's Rest back in, I want to say, 2019,
Mhm.
and Russell Blake was invited, and so not Russell Blake, excuse me, David Weber was invited, and I'd read the Honor Harrington books since I was in college, and I knew them all very well. And I was like, I can't believe he's coming. And so, but during the course of that conference, he and I got to talking. He realized I'd read a lot of his stuff, and I also told him that I had a cat named Nimitz because he used to like to sit on my
Aw.
shoulder. So, and then he pulls me aside like, "Hey, would you like to write some books with me?" And like, "Oh, twist my arm. How not hard." So, I get to learn at the foot of the master for space opera and military science fiction. And so that was going to be that was the Ascent to Empire series, where two books are out for it now that Bain published. And then Tony Weisskopf came to the 20 Books at 50K conference a year or two later, and I got to meet her, and I was like, I have some ideas. She said, send them over. And I pitched her like five different stories. One was the Shattered Star Legacy, which was published in December, and the other was Men of Bretton, which came out last week.
So, speaking specifically about Men of Bretton, I always like asking this because it's interesting to see how authors approach this. What would be your simple elevator pitch for the book?
It is the Odyssey meets Hammer Slammers with fewer affronts to the gods.
Okay. That's an interesting. I like the connection of you have something that's very elevated, but also something that's fun, and you very much can understand the concept there. Did you have so you mentioned Hammer Slammers. I'm guessing that you're mentioning that because of the just the military elements and maybe the lightheartedness,
Right.
because
And the tanks.
the books there are tanks in this, but it's not like a feature of the book. I would say it's part of it, but it's not tank. Why did you choose Hammer Slammers?
It's well, if I say Hammer Slammers, everyone immediately knows, oh, that's military sci-fi.
Hmm.
So, and it's also, kind of Hammer Slammers is stays on one unit predominantly, Hammer Slammers. So, because the Men of Breton focuses on this battalion of infantry from the planet Breton, so Hammer Slammers, Men of Breton, kind of like that.
Okay. And you obviously have a lot of experience, since you were in the military, and this very much is a military book. Were there any scenes or characters that you were just like totally just straight from your military experience? And conversely, was there stuff that you like totally had to make up because it would never, happen?
Well, there's a lot the soldiers who are in the Men of Breton book. They're all uh, I've met these kind of soldiers while I was in the army.
Yeah.
You have your soldiers who are a little shady in some things they do. Others are just, babes in the woods. You have your more experienced, gruffer guys. You have
Hmm.
your staff officer that, is trying too hard and doesn't quite have the competence for to do what he really wants to do. So all those characters were kind of, derived from people I knew. And then there's some spy characters who show up, and as a military
Hmm.
intelligence officer, that character is a little bit of a caricature of what people think MI officers are,
Hmm.
big old
Yes.
weenies. And I can't deny that as one who, as a former MI officer, that stereotype is totally true. So, but there's it's yeah, as far as the other scenes, like one part is that during my first tour in Iraq, we thought, okay, we're only going to be in Iraq for three months. Oh, now it's 6 months. Oh, we'll be home by Christmas. That old lie. And then then they said, oh, 12 months. We'll just be there 12 months. We're like, ah, fine, 12 months. And then we get to 12 months, and we turned over authority for our mission that we had in Biop or in the Baghdad in the Green Zone. Excuse me, we were in the Green Zone that tour. So we turned over everything. We had our advanced party in Kuwait. We're ready to go home. We are days away from real food and beer and our girlfriends and wives and everything. And then this guy named Muqtada al-Sadr started a revolt through central Iraq. And the army said, hey, Richard's squadron, you're going to drive south, but we need you to go to a place called Al-Qud and take it back. And we're like, what? Yeah, just go to the city that's full of insurgents and go fight. We're like, so we go to Al-Qud, and then we were just lost in the woods because like we're supposed to be home, and now we're in the stuff. And then it didn't stop there. We had to bounce back from city to city, taking these cities back from the insurgents. And so it was just there's this horrible feeling in our stomachs. Like we're supposed to be home and look at what we're doing right now
Mhm.
instead. And for Men of Breton, it's kind of similar. So that, this battalion gets to a world, they think they're going to do their duty for the hegemony, and then they get to go home, and then they get to hegemony, they get to the planet, and then everything falls apart hard.
Mhm.
And then then the battalion's looking around going, "Oh no, what do we do now?" And then the series is how does this unit and all these soldiers get home somehow? So that's the Odyssey aspect of like, how do you finally get home?
Right. I can see that now. You talk about the hegemony and the world building. I thought it was so interesting that between the briefing at the beginning and then seeing what happens with the hegemony towards the middle and then of course at the end, it was such a unique way of providing world building and quite literally using data dumps without the audience realizing it because it was like of course we're going to learn this information as we're going along with this. And so
Mhm.
how did you approach building the hegemony and how it was going to work with its member worlds and I don't want to spoil what happens in the book with the hegemony,
Mhm.
but how you would set up the crux of the book.
Well, when I first conceived of the hegemony, I was thinking, okay, this is Tito's Yugoslavia.
Okay.
And once the Soviets were gone, we know what happened to Yugoslavia. So like, so the hegemony we see at the beginning is that state with a lot of cracks in it.
Hmm.
And then so it was like, and then I previously to this I'd written a book called Hell's Horizon, which had it's a very prequel story. It's not required reading, but you should read it because it's good. And so you get a little bit more of the hegemony there. But as for I don't like info dumps. I know a lot of readers don't like info dumps.
Hmm.
So I work pretty hard to describe to hide the info dumps. So
Right.
it looks like it's just natural part of the story progression. Meanwhile, all the readers are getting here's some information you need, and it
Hmm.
just kind of builds on it slowly, slowly, slowly as it goes along. And that's just I'm not sh it's because I outline a lot before I
Hmm.
write
Yep.
that I go in there. I'm like, okay, here's how I'm going to let the reader know what the reader needs to know without it being an info dump. And so that's I get that compliment a lot, and I do appreciate it. And it just it just if I just intentionally know I'm going to have this kind of building exposition that's not an info dump, and I find ways to put those throughout the story.
Well, one of the reasons I think the scene works so well is because I felt the tension of what was happening, not just because of what you're learning about the hegemony, but in that scene, there are people in that room that the information is affecting right now, and you
Hmm.
don't know what's going to is it going to go down the direction it looks like it's going to go, or is it going to go totally opposite? And Saul is like all of a sudden worried, and one of our main characters is in the scene. And so I was
Yep.
like, oh dear. So I just thought that was so clever. I was like, ah, you're getting me with that. And then with the book, you don't just have the men of Breton. You also have characters that aren't specifically from Breton. I'm particularly thinking of Tessa, and I'm also thinking of Felix. So, how did you come up with having not just the main cast from that battalion, but adding in other characters?
So for Felix, I wanted to have an outsider view, somebody who is not from Breton and who's kind of, he's going to be very different. He's going to have a different reaction to everything. So that's where Felix came from.
Hmm.
And then also for Felix, his journey to meet up with the men of Breton also helped put in a lot of exposition along the way.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
then he ends up with the unit, and then he gets his kind of a no notorious nickname or
Yes, he
label,
does.
which that one actually does come from my military experience. There was an NCO who had a similar he had an encounter with someone who didn't want to pay attention. A bullet was fired and hit someone, and then that sergeant was forever known as what had happened there. So no one ever messed with that guy, but
Right. Yeah, yeah. No one's gonna mess with Felix, and I love
uh,
that throughout the book. they mention it every time he meets someone.
Yeah, and
And
they like,
the
no,
reason,
no, no.
yeah, and the thing, and the best part of it is it's his reaction that makes them keep going. It's because he hates it so much that they're
Yeah, he's
like,
like, I
oh, I'm
can't
gonna
do it.
keep introducing that.
Yep. And as for Tessa, I also wanted to have, a kind of a character who, approaches humanity during the course of the series. So when we
Hmm.
first meet her,
Yep.
she's off.
Yep.
And she's off because of her upbringing and her job. And then also Tessa, wonderfully, can drive the tank
Hmm.
that no one else can. So when I was thinking like, okay, how do I make this whole story interesting? I'm like, well, let's get a tank because tanks are awesome. But then I have all these infantrymen who aren't tankers. Like, okay, how do I, you know, get them to the point where they can move, you operate the tank, and there's gonna be plenty of humor along the way. And I never was a tanker. I was an artillery guy in military intelligence, but I know a lot of tankers, and they're quite happy to tell me this, that, and the other thing about how these things work. And
Hmm.
it's a future tank. It's not an Abrams, but
Right.
still, you're gonna have guys who get stuck as the loader and the guy who's doing aiming the weapons and all that. So that will kind of hold true.
Now, as we learned from that, we you do have a lot of humor in the book,
Mhm.
and sometimes it is like morbid humor, especially about what happens when you shoot someone in the wrong place. And then
Right.
some of it is also there's like a lot of gross humor about their situation that they're in at
Right.
times. But it really worked. It was like that was what made it so funny. Was this because that's what the military is really like, or were you
Yeah,
just really like writing that kind of humor in your books?
there's all kinds of ridiculous stuff that happens in the military all the time. And so it's just you had to be open to what that yeah, humor that's happening
Hmm.
and just be able to just kind of go with it. Like when I was in Iraq, the first time you ever go to an Iraqi barber, this is back in 2003, and you're not prepared. They'll sit there and they'll cut your hair, and all of a sudden out comes the cologne, and then they start massaging your scalp. You're like, what's going on here? And then the guy takes out like this little string, he puts it on your eyebrow, and it's zip, and your eyebrow is gone.
Oh
So
no.
you're sitting there looking in the mirror going, one eyebrow, and then you gotta let him get the other one, or
Yeah.
you're gonna look like an idiot. So
Hmm.
now you walk around with no eyebrows. And there was a lot of times where we would make fun of the guy who got his eyebrows cut off, and then somebody goes off to get their hair cut, and they come back with no eyebrows, and they're just like, "Shut up!" You know, it just comes out of nowhere, and they're not prepared for it. So there's ridiculous stuff like that. And then there's one scene towards the end of the book that for whatever reason, like the book, I had outlined everything, and nothing was gelling really until I got to this scene where there's a bit of a misunderstanding,
Yep.
and I think it's like something it's something that you see in a sitcom,
Hmm.
but that is entirely possible within within the military and in that story. So there's that horrible this horrible misunderstanding and some inadvertent disclosures that happen. And for whatever reason, when I got that scene down in just in the outline, the whole story worked for me now.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, fine, that's how it works. That's how it works. I'm not going to complain, but
I think you're right that that's the reason that scene is what sells it because the character interplay was so solid there, and that's when I mean you felt for these characters before, but and even though this isn't like a as serious a situation as is earlier in the book. This is a situation that you understand with the soldiers involved
mhm.
without spoiling it. Which I will say, I heard another interview where someone said the blank scene. I won't spoil
Mhm.
it for anyone, and
Right,
I
right.
spent the whole book being like,
The
"How is
what?
that gonna fit in here?"
Yeah,
And then I
like,
got to
what
that
kind of
scene, and
book
I was
is
like,
this? Yeah.
"Yeah, what kind of book is this?" And I was like, was I thinking about the wrong book?" And then I got to that scene, I was like, "That's hilarious."
Yeah.
So yeah, that worked.
I got to thank the Muse for that one, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
also, it's and like when I was in Iraq, sometimes we would have like the lone female soldier,
mhm.
and I was like, okay, everyone, come here, we're gonna have a talk.
That is
All right, we
and
gotta
it's
take care of her.
and
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
especially funny when you have someone like Tessa, who, as you said, there's something off and she's, missing some social cues,
Yeah,
but
lots of
every single other person has the social cues.
yeah.
And yeah. But those aren't the only characters. You also have some of the actual men of Breton, and I did want to
Mhm.
talk about Noah and Mason because them being brothers was, I thought, a very interesting dynamic. And because Mason was a little bit older and kind of watching out for Noah, it reminded me of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain looking out for his brother Tom Chamberlain in the Gettysburg movie and books.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, is that a common thing where siblings will be not only in this army but in the same unit?
For active duty, almost never. For reservists, yes. For a reserve unit or a National Guard unit, which is just kind of locally pulled together,
Hmm.
you'll see husband and wife, you'll see brothers, you'll see fathers and sons, fathers and daughters, mothers and sons. So you'll see that, but
Interesting.
it's almost always in National Guard and Reserve units because
Interesting.
it's also kind of a no-no for active duty. See, the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, if you don't expect any soldier to be rational and detached when it comes to
Mm,
their family members.
right.
So there's actually a lot of policies that says no family members in the same unit for active duty.
That makes sense. And
Mhm.
it does provide some interesting interplay between them and an interesting dynamic. I'm guessing that that is going to be an element of book two, because I feel like there's certainly part of that dynamic, two brothers being in the same unit, that is still yet to be explored. Am I right on that?
But you wait till the last book.
Oh, the last one. Oh, okay.
There's and then book 4 or 5, I have plans for one of the brothers that's gonna be will make sense later. But all right,
Okay.
I'm being too vague right now. So
So that was actually a perfect segue. Is the book the series planned to be five? Is that the final
like five
tally
or
or
six, five or
okay?
six.
Five, six. So it's going to be a Bane trilogy.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I've got the last scene, the last couple scenes actually just done in my head.
Oh,
So
that's good. You have a plan. So
yeah, so now it's just now get them to those scenes is the hard part.
you talked about how you did a lot of outlining and planning. Well, are you a serial plotter in all of your projects, or are you just on this particular series?
All my projects. I outline extensively for everything. It'll slow me down, but when it's time to just now it's time for the manuscript, it goes very smooth.
Hmm.
And even then, sometimes, I'll be writing and then like the muse will be like, "It's his sister." I'm like, "Oh, okay, hold on, let me change that now." And but having the outline helps me get everything done pretty quick after that.
I know that with Brandon Sanderson, he does like the progress bars, and he does the progress bar on his pre-writing, which takes some time. But once he does that, it's a very smooth process for the progress bar for his actual writing because he's planned out so much stuff that he's not you're not going to get. I assume you don't necessarily get much writer's block because you're able to plan so much.
Yeah. Yeah, having it's also nice when I've got the outline, I know the outline works, then I have a lot more confidence in the rest of the story because well, I know the whole thing works.
Mhm.
So, and I'm also just terrified of getting to the point where I'm 50,000 words into something and I realize it doesn't work at all. And then all that time has been wasted. So that's why I outline because I don't want to get to the point where I'm like, oops. Yeah.
So I want to take a quick second to pivot to one of your other books from Bain that you were touching on earlier, which is the Light of the Veil, which is the
Mhm.
first in the Shattered Star Legacy, which came out last year in December. Wanted to hear you talk a little bit about this book, what your pitch for this book is, and how you approached it.
The pitch was Star Wars, not Star Wars that's better than what we've had lately. So I told Tony this is a classic sort of hero's journey space adventure, and it's Star Wars that doesn't suck. And because I have been very disappointed with the movies that have been coming out for many years now, and I just stop and look. I'm like, why don't they just do what works? So my thought is, okay, let me do Star Wars or a space adventure in a way that I think would work better. So then we have Light of the Veil and there's a lot of big differences
Mhm.
between that and Star Wars, especially with the antagonists who are kind of undead,
Mhm.
um, undead werewolves a lot, which is undead werewolves terrify me, so I had to put that in the book and in space. But it's and so but for Light of the Veil, it's like let me write a space adventure story that I thought, well, what would what would George Lucas have watched when he was a kid? You know, that kind of Buck
Right.
Rogers, Flash Gordon sort of thing. So that's kind of where that that idea of space adventure, that's where Light of the Veil came from.
Okay. I can definitely see where that pitch came from. And you see, you know, touchstones of Star Wars throughout. It's not a copy, obviously, but it's
Mhm.
you could when I read it, I could see, okay, that was the influence there. That was the influence at the end. Particularly, I felt at the end,
Mhm.
it was very strongly Star Wars. This one, you know, Men of Bretton was much more straight up mill sci-fi. The technology was pretty standard. It was much more in the science fiction realm,
Mhm.
whereas Light of the Veil had a lot more into the fantastical realm,
Right.
specifically with because it's science fiction, you don't usually use the words magic system
Mhm.
in a science fiction, but it was kind of like a magic system that was in there. I wanted to know quickly how you approached that.
You know, trying to make up a magic system in a science fiction setting was pretty hard.
Hmm.
And when I was trying to think about how this would work, and then I thought, okay, you know, if you have magic, typically the idea of magic is it somehow breaks the rules of physics.
Hmm.
So I looked at the you know the world this was taking place in, and like, okay, how do I influence the rules of physics in this? And like, okay, let's have the veil, which is a higher level sort of reality that touches the reality within Light of the Veil. And then there's going to maybe there's a lower level of a dimension that can come up later. Who knows? So it was like, okay, so we have this the magic system is the veil and what happens in there. It's like, okay, how does this work now? And so then a lot of okay, then I had to stop and think, how does the veil influence everything? How do they gain power over the veil, which is where the crystals came from? And then how the journeying into the veil, and then what does that mean? So it was a lot of okay, you know, just building the world kind of taught showed me how the story would go. So so I you know I had the veil, that's the magic system there, and like okay, now that I've got that, then the story can take place.
So, before I let you go, I wanted to ask about how does the process, because you had some series and books that were more indie pub, and then you've had this from Bain, which is closer to the trad side. They're more
Mhm.
indie than most trad, but still they're closer to the trad side. So I wanted to know how does has your process changed at all between the two, or do you generally write the same?
Generally, it's the same. And like I when I was submitting things for Bane, I didn't get any sort of different instructions. So, you know, what I wrote for Bane is essentially what I write for indie pubs or for other publishers. So there was no real big difference.
Okay. And then, do you have any projects or anything coming up that you can tell people about besides Men of Brenton?
I have I'm working on the very final Ember Wars series, which
Okay.
and that has 3 books left and maybe 4. And then after that, I am going to write a series called the Sivar Trilogy, which is about a alien race that almost annihilates Earth, but then ends up disintegrating somehow. And then now it's humanity's got to figure out, well, how did this happen? And then explore the mystery of the Sivar, and then how humanity is going to react to that species for the rest of the time. So that'll start that in the spring. So.
Okay. And then, if people want to follow you online or see updates or find out when books are being released and stuff, where should they follow you?
Well, you can find my books on Amazon real easy. Just put in Richard Fox, you'll see everything. And come to Facebook at Richard Fox Author, and just like the page, and I put everything on there. And then if you go to richardfoxauthor.com, you can sign up for my mailing list and miss nothing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on
Yeah, my
the
pleasure.
channel today. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.